Today is May 9th, 2018. I'm Lois Martinazzi, and I'm interviewing my dear friend. I call her Duffy Hamilton, but give me your full name.
Drusilla.
Drusilla Rogers.
Rogers, right.
Yes, I remember when I was a teenager, or a young teenager, my sister Joanne and I came across you in this some part down in Tualatin, and we talked to you, and she knew you better than I did. I thought, oh, what a pretty lady, what a pretty girl. I did. So, Drusilla, Duffy we call you, where were you born?
I was born in Vancouver, well, just outside of Vancouver, Washington. The area is Sifton Orchards, which is part of Vancouver now.
Now, I've heard the name Sifton before. What was it famous for? What was Sifton?
It must have been famous for prune orchards because my mother was attended high school in Vancouver, and she was a prune princess.
A prune princess? Your mother was?
I think that was like as big as the Rose Festival in Portland. It has.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I remember your mother too very well. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up with my grandmother here in Tualatin.
And what was her name?
Ethel Hedges. Her second husband was Ralph Hedges.
Who was her first husband?
John Otterstrom.
Oh, yes.
And mother's maiden name, of course, was Otterstrom.
And where did they live in Tualatin?
I do believe they lived in a house across the railroad tracks on the golf course side.
Mm-hmm.
There was several homes in there. The Ames, Walter John, and lived there. The Lads, I think, were one of the original houses there. And then across from that would be my great-great-great-grandfather's store, one of the first ones in Tualatin.
And what was his name?
Ben Cummins.
Yes.
Or usually Ben, Steuben.
Steuben, yes. I've heard so much about him. Yes. And he came across the plains?
He was very young. I think he was about age 9. He and his sister Anna came with their parents, Irwin Cummins and Martha Jane Bird Cummins.
Mm-hmm.
1852, I believe.
Right, yeah. Well, I believe that house is where the Barngrovers lived.
Right along there, it must have been.
Yeah, I think that my great-grandmother's uncle, William Sedlak, built that house. And so I remember that house very well.
I have a picture of my mother standing on the mail cart that met the train right there.
Right.
When she was about 7. I think they moved from Tualatin when she was about 8.
Oh, they moved. Your mother did?
Mm-hmm. As a young girl. She only went to a little bit of the grade school here.
I see.
But my grandmother finished all of her school.
And what was your grandmother's name?
Ethel Hedges.
Ethel Hedges.
Ethel Shaver.
Shaver.
Was her maiden
name. So
name.
you are descended from the Shavers, the Cummins, and who else?
The Birds.
Birds, yes.
And a Cummins married into Weeks. Cummins married into Galbraith. Well, there aren't too many people in early Tualatin that I wasn't related
That's
to.
That's correct. There weren't very many people here, and you were very well related.
Yeah, if you counted the chickens, there might be a couple hundred.
So you and your mother lived in Vancouver for a while?
She was already married, of course, but she had lived there from about the age of 8 until after she was married.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved into downtown Vancouver, around a couple of places in the state of Washington.
And when did you come back to Tualatin?
In my heart, I never left it.
Good for you.
But
That's not me.
let's see, I must have been about 1932 when I came, as I was 4. came back. I never lived in Tualatin again. I lived in Tigard and surrounding areas, but actually a home in Tualatin, no.
So you moved back with your grandmother?
I lived with my grandmother from that age of about 3.5 or 4 to the time I left for college. And then I was married and lived out on my own.
Right. So when you came back to Tualatin and lived with your grandmother, what was Tualatin like?
It was a lazy little town. You walked everywhere. There wasn't any transportation. Our transportation to Portland was the, was it Western Elect? No, just plain electric line, I guess, the train anyway.
Right.
And the bus service, I think, came in about 37, 39 in through there. And I can remember coming back with big shopping bags of stuff from she'd do her monthly shopping.
Right. So where'd you go to school?
The elementary school, the first one was the big 2-story plus basement one that was built in 1905, I think. And then in the 5th grade, we had our new elementary school, which of course was the only one here then.
That was the brick school?
That was the brick.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So
And
did you go to the brick school in 5th grade?
6th grade, yes.
Oh, okay.
7th grade, no. 8th grade, I graduated from there.
So where'd you go in the 7th grade?
7th grade, I went to Mount Tabor Grade School in Portland.
Oh, I see.
And I missed a grade earlier. I started in the 1st grade with the little room that was behind the gymnasium at the old school. And I mean the old school.
Right.
And then I think it was either 2nd or 3rd grade, I went to Multnomah Grade School. And didn't reconnect with anybody until I met some of them again in Tigard High School.
So what was Tualatin like? You say it was a lazy little town. Was there a grocery store?
Oh yes, there was Ed Robinson and Grace had their grocery store, and then there was the little one we've always referred to as the brick store on the corner. And there was just the 2 of those, not much else. Finally, a meat market came in, independent of the Hawkhurst.
Hawkhurst, yeah.
Hawkhurst,
I remember him.
I believe during the war, Mrs. Hawkhurst was in charge of Red Cross projects. That's all I remember about that. And I remember what a stingy lady Grace Robinson was.
Really? What do you mean?
I mean, she'd take a very small basket of something to the Ladies' Aid Society and go back with it just heaped up with everything for her husband to eat, and some of it got back out on the grocery shelf.
Oh, what a juicy tidbit that is.
And I can remember seeing her peel the outside leaves off a lettuce and putting them out again and revamping the strawberries. And let's see, as far as things, I don't remember. Mr. Clow came in and was a barber that we had later on, but I don't know where the men went for their haircuts, or maybe they didn't.
Well, didn't Asa Mack, wasn't he a...
Oh, yes, and he was another relative.
Yeah, that's right. He was a relative of yours, yeah. And the house is still standing, of course, close to here.
Asa Mack's mother was Mary Cummins Mack, so that goes back to the Cummins. And I wasn't here when the ice cream parlors and all those things came in.
Oh, you weren't?
I was already off in college.
Oh, I see. I can remember going down to Tualatin and walking down and getting a 5-cent ice cream cone. 1 scoop was 5 cents. 2 scoops was 10 cents.
Oh my.
Do you know what it costs to get an ice cream cone at Baskin Robbins now?
Yes.
Unreal.
Speaking of ice cream, I remember they used to have these ice cream things that the Robinson's store had, and every so often there was printed on the wooden paddle that it was free, or you got the next one free.
Oh, really?
And I seemed to be kind of lucky and picked those every once in a while. And she would sit with her eagle eye and just watch, trying to figure out how I figured out how I got a free one, because she didn't want to give it up.
Well, now, in those days at the grocery store, did you pick things off the shelves and take them to the counter? Or you didn't have a shopping cart?
I believe that it was after the age where you gave the guy the list and he ran around and filled it. I don't recall that, but I think you kind of went through the store and picked up your own and took it and paid for it. But no, you had to pack it.
Did they have grocery bags?
They must have, but I don't recall what they
It
had.
seems like I can remember a ball of string that they would wrap things up and put a ball of...
Wrapped
wrap it up
very
in
heavy
string.
butcher's paper.
Butcher paper wrapped in
Yeah.
string.
We didn't buy our milk at a grocery store. I walked up to Charlie and Mary Roberts for their milk. And I didn't know at the time, but they were also related.
Yes, now how was that?
Mary Roberts was the daughter of Ben Cummins' sister,
Which sister?
Anne.
Oh. Was she a Fuller?
No, the prior marriage, which the spelling has been quite different. It's Wirtz or West or Wirt in various places that I have done my genealogy. I don't know for sure, and I certainly didn't know it at the time. In fact, we lived with them, Grandma and I, during the flood, because our home had water to it, and Mr. Hannigan, that had the service station, he and his, I think they were teenage by that time, boys, rescued us by rowboat and took us up to the railroad tracks, and then we walked up to the Roberts.
And was that the flood of 39 or 37? What?
I am not positive anymore, but I think it was the first flood, because we were living, I don't know what's there now, on the other side of the street from where most of my years were spent, on the Lower Boones Ferry Road. And that was the second flood, so it must have been the 37 and then 39. And the water just came in under one door a little bit that year, the second flood.
So you moved in Tualatin, you lived in two different places?
Yes, Grandma had two homes. The first one was where Hannigan's service station is. There was their home. The next one, the Thornbrews, Maddie and Ray Thornbrew, and then Grandma's house. And that was when my great-grandmother was still alive, and we were...
And who was your great-grandmother?
Emma Alice Cummins, what was her married? Shaver was her married name, yes.
Oh. So what house did you grow up in?
I would say I was in that house until about the 4th or 5th grade, which would have been 1936, 37, no, we were there through the 39 flood. And then, 37. Anyway, the house that Grandma bought from Galbraith's, that they had built for Don Galbraith, that would be Bessie and Don Sr., was the house that I spent most of my years in.
My father said that was John L. Smith's house.
That was who?
John L. Smith's house, that he built it. And that his grandson, then Don, lived there.
Oh, well, anyway, in the family, the story was that the Galbraiths had built it for their son Don. And And then she bought it anyway from Galbraith's
Right.
with insurance money from her first husband's
Who was her
death.
first husband?
John Otterstrom. He was
Oh,
killed
right.
in an industrial accident.
I see.
Willamette Iron and Steel in Portland,
Mm.
crushed between two machines.
Wow.
And then that was about the time she and Ralph were married, Ralph Hedges.
So, tell me more about Tualatin when you were a kid.
Well, Grandma was a little bit social, and so we walked to the neighbors, and the neighbors could be 2 miles away or 3 miles away, but we still walked to.
Did you walk up and visit my grandmother, Nettie Martinazzi?
Yes, I can remember walking to see
Really?
her, and we walked up to see Orpha Saggart. And I don't recall if she was married to Charles or Earl or one of the Saggarts. And, well, she would babysit evenings for Cecil Nyberg Dunmeyer, and we walked down there. And it was just a...
Oh, that's right. They lived across from the Nyberg house, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then John Nyberg gave that to Clayton when he got married, and they moved up on Avery.
That was a big, I remember that very well. That was a big conflict in the...
Yes, it was, and the chandelier went with Cecil.
Yes. I remember that very much because I babysat for both Kay Nyberg and Cecil Dunmeyer.
Oh.
And they both talked to my mother. And Cecil said, Papa gave me that house. And Kay Nyberg said, well, we needed a house to live in because, so it was a big thing in the community, yeah. I remember Cecil was very angry and she took a lot of stuff out of the house.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of fun stories about Tualatin.
Oh, yeah. Now, so did you work on the Beaver Dam?
Pardon?
Did you work on the Beaver Dam? Did you weed onions?
I worked in their Nyberg's onion fields, and I worked in Burgess berry fields, and
Now, Burgess, who's that?
they were a Sherwood family. John Burgess had 2 good-looking sons, and lots of girls worked there.
So you picked berries?
Picked lots of berries. That was my school money. That was my clothes money. And it wasn't unusual in those days. It was more or less expected. And I forgot what I was going to say.
So did you weed onions?
Yes,
You weeded onions.
under the supervision of Zara Nyberg.
How was she to work for? Was she pretty nice?
She was a taskmaster of the very first order. And she did things that were good for you, like you had to wear long sleeves and you had to wear a big hat, and it probably saved me from skin cancer. But she also had a very eagle eye for getting every little weed, and when you weeded onions for Zara, you weeded.
Right. 8 hours a day, right?
Mm-hmm. I
So-
walked there and I walked back, and
Right.
those clods were so hot and hard, it wasn't fun.
It wasn't fun. Hard on the knees. Yeah. How many other people weeded onions with you?
There was just me. There was, she was right along working too. And a couple of men that were hired that I don't know.
How much did you get paid?
All I can remember was a pittance. What I got in a week was what you get less than an hour now anywhere.
I remember I weeded onions on the Sherwood onion flats. I think we started out at 50 cents an hour and then 75 cents an hour. And my sister and I, we were kept up with the men, and we asked for more money. We asked for 85 cents an hour, and the mother said, no, you get 75 cents an hour. But the men got $1 an hour. But we kept up with them.
Uh-oh. Well, I didn't have that kind of competition, but I'm sure I didn't get more than 30 cents.
Really, that's amazing. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
And you know, it was wonderful to have a job,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
I just assumed that that was what I was supposed to do. I never even looked around for something better.
Right, me too. My dad was a real good friend of the Galbraiths and of Chet Fishbach, whose mother was a Galbraith.
Mhm.
And Dad took us out there about when I was 10 or 11 years old, my sisters and me, and he worked with us for the first 4 hours, showed us how to work, how to keep up with the men, get all the weeds out. And he said, you get there early, you stay till the day is done, and you'll always have a job.
Mhm.
Because my folks, like yours, were raised during the Depression.
Well, it was a moral thing to do your best and be responsible,
Be responsible, yes.
which I don't think they have now. There wasn't much in the houses, of course, were a long ways apart, all over, even where I lived in right downtown Tualatin. And to go to Mrs. Cole's to visit her was not just 2 houses down,
Right.
but a distance.
So did your house have plumbing?
Yes, the house had a path, the one on the far side of town, and the outhouse was right behind the Grange Hall, and so was theirs. But the house was plumbed for a tub and a toilet. You had no basin in your bathroom at the second house, the one on Boone's Ferry. And it had been added. They'd taken part of a huge porch, which was also the laundry room, the wood shed, just about everything off the kitchen.
So tell me about laundry. How did your grandmother wash clothes?
It was one of those ringer things that had 2 tubs, and the water went this way, the clothes went this way, the ringer went in between.
You ever caught your hair in the wringer? I did one time.
No, in fact, I probably didn't even help her. And there was a great big wood box beside the back door there that accompanied the washer. Of course, there was no dryers. It either went outside to be hung, or it was hung on the rest of that porch area.
Right.
And so was the canning. All the supplies were, that was just the family room without the family. It was,
So did your grandmother have a garden?
very definitely. That was the only time I ever saw Ralph Hedges do very much, was to spade the garden for Grandma. She didn't quite get all of her produce, though, because I had this handy little knife that I'd go out and steal all of the cucumbers, and all she'd find was cucumber peelings, pickle peelings. Or,
So you went out, so you ate the cucumbers?
before she could get them on the table. And the same way with the green peas. But she was one of those old-fashioned gardeners that a row of daffodils, a row of onions, and it was, she had a very large lot, and half of it was garden. And there was a dug well on it.
Well, that's where you got your water. Okay.
And now looking back on it, nobody ever boiled their water after the flood receded. It was just, you were drinking Tualatin water. That's why I never drank water as a little girl. And the screen rotted through one time, and Robin fell in and died.
Oh my.
And it began to stink. Those days weren't all good.
No. So where'd you go to high school?
Tigard High School. We had our choice in Tualatin, as you know, between Sherwood and Tigard. And in those days, mentality was the city folk went to Tigard, the farmers went to Sherwood.
Oh, that's right, because I went to Sherwood. You know, I went to both Sherwood and Tigard's May Festival, May Fates, you know, festival. And I think I rode my bike over to Sherwood, but I like the Sherwoods better, so that's why I went to Sherwood High School. Not a good choice. Yeah, in those days, because two of my sisters and me went to Sherwood, and the other three went to Tigard.
Oh, I never did know which way it was.
And apparently you could go to also West Lynn, because Larry Lee went to West Lynn, and the district would pay tuition for whatever high school you went
Well, that was only for those few that lived that way up 65th, I
Oh,
think.
I see.
It wasn't a choice for those of us down.
Oh, I see, because that was in Clackamas County.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And no, it wasn't our choice.
So you remember the feed store?
I do, and I remember that little fat man that swung his legs over the edge.
Wayne Lundy?
Wayne Lundy.
Somebody said, you know, they built the dock on the feed store just to fit him because he sat right there. My kids used to call him the Potato Man. They looked like a potato.
I think the ledge was actually there for the benefit of loading hay and things.
Right. You remember horses being used for farm work?
No, I don't. That was a little bit before my time, although I'm very ancient. And I remember especially the new feed store that was not there by the tavern, that was over on the other street.
Now, tell me about that.
Julian Kemp, yeah, Julian, built that one, and his son, Julian, Jerry, and I used to play in that for hours and days.
Now, Duffy, where was that compared to the feed store that was next to the brick store?
Long after, I mean, the feed store by the brick store and the tavern there was there when I moved into Tualatin. I don't know what happened to that space. I think it was just kind of removed. The tavern had a little house next to it where the Clows lived, Daisy and George Clow and Loretta, who was just a little bit younger than I, and she and I were about the only ones any age in Tualatin in those days. And then when Andy's folks bought the tavern, he and the Smith children, Gladys and Fred, were the only other my age at all. Over here in this part of town there was the Todds.
And where did they live?
The Todds,
Gladys and Fred.
they lived in the house that was next door to what would have been my great-great-great-grandfather Ben Cummins' grocery store. It would be about where the, I think there's a pet place there now. Right here.
Oh, I know what you mean, yeah, yeah.
Actually, Dolores Nelson and her husband, Dolores McLaughlin,
They built a house there.
they built the house there, yeah.
So do you remember the row of houses along Boone's Ferry where Smiths used to live? Do you remember those houses? Did people live in those in your day?
Yes, Gladys and Fred lived there yet.
So you remember old Mrs. Smith?
Very much,
So
yes.
what was she like?
She was an enigma. She was very strange with her religion and very sweet and loving as a mother and well, she tolerated me very nicely. And they were our neighbors both on both sides of whatever the street is now where we lived. They lived across from the old ballpark. Mrs. Smith built that house, and then must have been quite a carpenter, because Mary Smith also built the house behind Grandma's other home. That must be Seneca Street now or something.
Well, was she,
She never finished it inside. It was all stud walls, but
well, do you remember her daughter that had the bad eye?
I remembered Virginia and Mabel, whatever the other one's name was that changed it to Mildred. Virginia and Mildred, her two older girls,
Okay.
yes.
Virginia married Willie Thaler.
And she's Mary Leslie's
Yes.
mother, yes.
Yeah. So Gladys was your friend.
Mhm.
I remember Gladys. Yeah.
She and I were just about the only girls to play with, except for Wilma Jensen, who lived up across the bridge.
Oh, really?
She and, well, Wilma's mother and her sister Joyce never lived here, lived next to Ruth McReynolds
Mm-hmm.
along the railroad track
Right.
there. And Ruth McReynolds and my mother at one time worked at the Tualatin Golf Course when it was strictly Jewish golf course. And
What did they do?
they were waitresses. And in those days, the people didn't pay or tip the people who served them. They gave it to Alton Robbins, who was the golf pro, and he distributed it back to them. And he didn't always do it, because there was a couple that were particularly favored, that both Ruth, who later turned out to be what, a Tualatin treasurer, city of a Tualatin treasurer.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she and Mother never got, a percentage was taken out.
I see. So did you go to church? Was there a church in Tualatin?
There definitely was this little church that is now the Heritage Center, and I probably started there at about the age of 5. I can't remember my grandmother going with me very often. Her mother would once in a while when she came out from Portland, and it was my home away from home, yes.
Oh,
And
well, so who was your Sunday school teacher?
I was just trying to remember that, and I think Mrs. Pennington
Oh, really?
was at one time, and I believe Mrs. Manlove was, or Mrs. Manlove was head of the department or something.
I can remember Mrs. Manlove. She sang really strong. She had a really strong voice, and she would stand up there and lead us in singing, and then she'd say, "Classes, take your places." And then the classes, would go upstairs or into the kitchen or whatever, yeah.
They never used the upper part when I was going.
Oh, really?
You in fact were forbidden to go up there.
Oh, my gosh.
Just the main floor, and I don't recall a basement even. But I think there was a basement, wasn't there?
Well, I think they dug the basement later.
Oh,
Because I remember Larry Lee said that he never went to church. I don't know how he got involved in it, but he said he helped dig the basement out. So where was your class? Where did your class meet?
just at tables in the room that they were using as a dining room off to the side of
So it would
the...
have been over there, correct? And wasn't there a kitchen?
Yes. And
It was back there, yeah.
I would stop every time the Ladies' Aid Society met, and then Grandma and I would walk home from there, and I'd try and snitch a cookie or something. But it was quite a group. Mrs. Castile, I think, was the chairman or the president of that organization for as long as John Nyberg was mayor. They seemed to hang on to positions here in Tualatin.
Right.
Bill Barngrover was fire chief for I don't know how many 100 years.
Do you remember any house fires when you were a kid?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember any house fires?
Yes, we had a chimney fire.
Oh,
I burned too many papers in the little stove upstairs and caught the soot on fire. And they came and took this chain and rubbed it down this chimney to get the soot on down into the fireplace itself on this first floor. And the bricks that they knocked off just stayed where they were. Nobody ever put the chimney back
so you
together.
had a fireplace upstairs?
No, the fireplace was in the living room on the first floor, and my bedroom and this little stove were just a little wood-burning stove, like an old-fashioned Franklin stove.
Right.
It wasn't exactly a pot-bellied stove,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the only fire except for one up beyond Charlie Roberts' place. There was a home that burned to the ground, and I remember standing on the railroad tracks watching that go up in smoke, and it was so traumatic. I can still see exactly.
Was that where the lads were living then?
I don't know the people that were living there. I doubt if it was lads.
Okay.
It was, there's never been a house in that particular area since. Probably almost on the Edel property,
Oh, I see.
which surprises me that it comes this far.
So did you ever see movies when you were a kid?
The movie was the only time my step-grandfather Ralph would ever take the car out practically. We would go to Sherwood to those outdoor movies. I think it was a Friday or a Saturday night, where they'd show it on the side of a blank building, and you took your chair or your blanket and you sat there and you watched the movie.
Did they charge for it, or was it free?
I don't think they could have charged for it, because here we were out there on grass, unless they passed a plate, and I don't remember that. But
I didn't ever go to those movies, but I remember hearing about it. Apparently that the store owners in Sherwood paid for it so that people would come to town and buy their groceries and things.
it was just there, and we got to go quite often. As I say, he didn't take the car out very often.
So there was sound also at the movie?
There must have been.
Uh-huh.
I know sound came in my mother's day, because I remember hearing her talk about it. Before that, I guess they played the piano for noise.
So you played the piano?
I took piano lessons from Mrs.
Gilroy?
Gilroy,
Yes.
and encountered Albert Gilroy, and her sister lived with what was her name? Gertrude Dooley. Mrs. Gilroy's sister, Gertrude Dooley. And I can remember them watching me out the window come for my lesson and stopping to take some of their plums. I guess they didn't like to
I think that because I took lessons from Mrs. Gilroy also. What was her name? Olive Gilroy.
Yes.
It seems to me, and I may be wrong on this, that the government paid her to give 6 lessons to kids. Do you remember that?
Well, she got money from Grandma.
Oh, because I don't remember if my parents paid her or not, but I remember that I took about 6 lessons from her, and she was very short and very fat.
Yes.
And had this little white piano that she bought at the Lewis and Clark Fair. Remember the fair that was in Portland? The exposition? I can't remember exactly what it was called.
Yeah.
World's Fair, I think it was.
Oh, the Lewis and Clark?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she bought that piano. I remember her quite well. She had a little chart that she laid over the keys, and she taught me, what the notes were. I caught on pretty quickly, and then she wanted me to play an etude, which was a practice, I guess. I think I took 6 lessons from her.
I think I took as many lessons until you got to do two hands.
Yes, I remember Albert sitting there too.
Mhm.
He's sitting beside the piano.
He ended up as a chef at one of the high-rise restaurants in Portland. Last I heard of him.
I remember that Clayton Nyberg told me that he bought all that property. Of course, the Nybergs say that they never bought any property except the filbert orchard, but he bought all that property.
Mm. Also, for the Nybergs, Clayton had a project with the Oregon State Extension Group, and it was tasseling corn. You skipped 2 rows and tasseled, skipped 2 rows and tasseled, I think, or something like that, or vice versa.
Did you work for him doing that?
I worked in the cornfields for
I
them,
did
too.
that too.
Yeah.
My sister and I worked, we never got paid.
And there's a story involved that I won't tell.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
But, let's see. I can't recall anything of interest.
Well, tell me, you see, what is now the CI, the Country Inn, was Klau's restaurant. Was it a tavern at that time, or was it just a lunchroom, or what?
I'm sorry?
The Klau's, what is now the tavern, the old tavern? Klau's had it, you say.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a lunchroom, or was it a tavern, or what?
No, it was kind of a upscale, cleaned up bar and ice cream parlor.
Oh, really?
And then he had his chair for his barber shop on the side of that. And then they lived there and had, I went a lot of places with the Klaus just to get out of my mother's hair, or
Mm-hmm.
to keep from messing in their things probably, for a while she worked there too.
Your mother worked there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, as a waitress?
Mm-hmm. Or, I don't know,
Whatever, yeah.
something. Sundays or on weekends it was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I got to go in to visit all of their friends in Portland and all kinds of things.
Oh, you got to do a lot of things. So did you ever go to any of the swim parks?
The one swimming thing that I remember in particular was the class at the church had someone that had a home that had the access to the Lake Oswego, and so we got to go picnic and go swimming there, and my grandma gave me special orders that I wasn't to swim because that lake was just as grudgy as the Tualatin River. It was the same water.
That's right.
But anyway, of course I did anyway,
Yes, yes.
and had a hard time explaining damp hair when I got home, and the fact that a dead fish scale had scraped my shoulder, and a few other things.
So did you ever go to Romer's Rest or Avalon?
Oh, of course, that was our hangout, especially in high school. We'd go, all the fellas that had cars, and we'd all go down there, and they had a nice pavilion and a jukebox, and
And which one?
at Romer's Rest.
Romer's Rest, I remember Romer's.
Avalon came along a year or so later, and I remember coming back once and going with my old gang to Avalon when I was in college, but not high school.
Mm-hmm.
High school was Romer's
Romer's
Rest.
Rest, yeah. I remember Romer's Rest. So well.
And don't go in the water.
Oh, well, we went in the water, and they had those swimming tanks or something, you know. because
Yes.
I wasn't much of a swimmer. I didn't like to swim, but we could play in the water, yeah.
I know Wilma Jensen and I one time were swimming out at the river just about where the Tualatin Country Club dumped its raw sewage.
Mm.
And we were out in there at one of the times that they did it.
Wow.
And I've had maybe dysentery, E. coli, haunting me ever since.
Yes, that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
You don't remember Jurgens Park, do you?
No, I don't.
Apparently Jurgens Park, John Jurgens had the first swim park on the river.
Up the river, and then there was another one even beyond that, Elsner's Park.
Yes, Elsner's.
In the old days. And
And there was one down by, I can't remember what the name of it, but down by Wonker's Corners, the river there, there was a swim park. Swanson's? What? Shipley? I don't think it was Shipley's, no. Oh, Shipley's lived there.
are you thinking of Schoenberg?
Slosson's, I think it was Slosson's.
Oh,
Yeah, Slosson's, yeah, because the shoppers told me that they used to go down there.
well, I made the canoe trip up the Tualatin River once with Bill Gillum.
You did?
From his house all the way up to Romer's Rest.
Oh my!
And then I told him I wasn't going back.
In a canoe?
In a
Wow.
canoe, yeah.
That'd be scary.
Yeah, he was quite the waterman.
Yes, he was, wasn't he? Yeah, he was the lifeguard at Romer's Rest, wasn't he?
And that was we used to sneak up there for senior day and all kind. It was quite a place.
Yeah, I remember the jukebox, there was a dance hall going down, you know, when you paid to get, how much did we pay to get in? Do you remember?
I don't think there was any charge. I think the charge was for swimming, but I can't remember. Somebody else paid for me if I did.
Yeah, well, it seems like we went down the path and there was this dance hall on the right.
It was where the land flattened out.
Yes, yeah.
And then the floats and things were down below that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there was, you could rent swimsuits, I think. Couldn't you rent swimsuits? I think you could rent swimsuits, bathing
Oh,
suits.
I don't
I'm pretty
know.
sure.
I can't
And-
remember, but I know Bill was a lifeguard down there
Yeah,
one time.
yeah, and you could rent canoes. And there
Yeah,
was,
Avalon was the one that had the paddle boats that were fun.
yes, there was kind of a swan boat.
Hmm.
And there, you know, they have reassembled one of those swan boats.
Oh,
Yeah.
they still have them out on Blue Lake
Really?
in Portland. Hmm.
Oh my. So when you went to Tigard High School, there was a school bus that
Yes.
picked you up?
Yes, I always lived just beyond the lines and couldn't ride the school bus to grade school. I had to walk. But when I got to high school, I got to ride one of Edel's buses.
One of Edel's buses, Who was the bus driver?
Oftentimes it was Jim Edel.
Jim. I don't remember Jim Edel.
He was the boy and the girl twins.
Oh, I didn't know those.
He was Clarence's, well, he would be August Edel's son.
Oh, I see.
And I remember August Edel's funeral.
Tell me about it.
It was very high Catholic Mass, and Grandma insisted I go. We could be dismissed from class to go, and I didn't really want to go, but Grandma insisted. And I found out later, well, August Edel had been one of her boyfriends.
Well, now, how did he die? I know.
He was blown up in a dynamite stump blowing on the property on the farm. Apparently something had gone wrong, and he went back to check, and about that time the dynamite ignited and blew him and everything. And I don't remember his wife very much. I'd only seen her maybe a couple of times. Then the two twins were younger than I, and Clarence was quite a bit older. But,
I remember.
oh, about this funeral though.
Yes.
It was, of course, numerous priests and lots of incense, and very, very impressive as a young girl that had never seen
Which church was it?
St. Anthony's in
In Tigard.
Tigard. Mhm. and been there for funerals since.
I remember I talked to Clarence, and he was very bitter that, I don't know if it was Joe, somebody he blamed for killing his father. I don't know, somebody who set the fuse.
Was in charge or with the method. Oh.
Yeah, but he was very bitter about that.
Hmm.
He also told me something about the Nybergs, which off tape I will tell you about. Oh, we old timers have our little secrets, don't we?
I got another story about them.
Okay, good. So, how many people used to go to this church when you were a kid?
The seats seemed to be fairly well filled. The old-fashioned hard pews. Mm-hmm. At least we didn't have to sit on folding chairs. And the first minister and wife that I remember was this chubby little darling. He was a Danish accent. His name was Peterson.
I remember him, Hans Peterson.
Yeah.
I remember him.
And his gorgeous son, who came down and visited once in a while.
You would notice that.
And he had both the Wilsonville Church and the Tualatin Church.
Oh.
And he would go up to Wilsonville first and come back, or vice versa. And I tried to get Grandma to invite them for dinner sometime because they didn't make much money or anything, and she was too embarrassed.
Oh.
She didn't want to.
I remember that at a funeral, I don't know how old I was, 10 or 12, and it was here, and people would bring flowers from their yard. And I remember Hans Peterson saying how wonderful it was. I think I was in the choir sang, how wonderful it was that there was a place for us to go when we died. Yeah, I remember Hans Peterson very well.
And his wife was just as rotund as he, really.
Yeah, I don't quite remember her.
I do have a picture of them.
With your mother?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember seeing your mother and her new husband and Hans Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember her, his wife. If I saw a picture of her.
She looked like a little Danish gal too, but she wasn't light. She was dark,
Mm-hmm.
dark hair, and overweight. And then I don't remember really very many of the ministers from the church. Reverend Black was the minister who conducted my grandma's funeral. But other than that, I can't recall anybody.
Black.
Mm-hmm.
And what year was that?
About 1981.
1981? No. I don't remember Black, because I always went to this church.
I'll have to look that up. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
At this age, you have a horrible memory.
Okay, so you remember playing baseball when you were a kid?
I remember watching the town team play
So
baseball.
where did the town team play?
They had a blank area. What's there now? Must be about where it wouldn't be where the lake is. Off about where the one shopping area is on Martinez. It's off in there somewhere. Was that be where the
Was it where the dog food factory was?
somewhere in there
Yeah.
was just a ball field?
Yeah, I remember that. Uh-huh.
And the young fellows, 17, 20, in through there, had a town team, and a lot of beer
Oh, really?
and fun.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun to see them. And of course, root for the home team.
Root for the home team, yeah.
But as we had no such thing as girls' teams when I was in high school. It was just part of PE. And I remember playing third base. And I remember getting a home run when I had a boyfriend and his buddies watching from the side. They were going to go ha ha ha. And I got a good hit. And they left. They couldn't stand it. But girls kind of got left out of sports in my day. It was several years after that that they could play, and now they can win scholarships and get college payments and all kinds of things.
Well, I can remember going to school, and the kids, girls and boys, would play a game called Crossout. And it was like baseball or softball, but instead of let's see, what did they do? They'd throw the ball in front of the person. If you're running to a base, throw the ball in front of you. Don't you remember Crossout? Oh, I do. Well, I was a horrible ball player, horrible hitter. I could never hit. Finally, somebody, for Christ's sakes, Lois, here's how you do it. You're doing like this. And it worked.
The game that I remember, it was in the old grade school, was the little pump house that was just the right size to play Annie over.
Oh.
And that one where you
threw the ball over the building?
Yeah, and if you catch it, you can run around to the other side and catch as many people as you can, and they have to be on your side. That was my favorite.
Oh, that sounds like fun. I remember playing hopscotch. You play hopscotch?
Where did you draw the lines? We didn't have any place.
That's right, you didn't. Well, they had a concrete walk or something from the brick school. Yeah, I remember the chalk, we'd draw the lines, playing hopscotch. That was fun.
I never thought of it, but Grandma's house on Boone's Ferry side was the only one with a sidewalk. I tried to skate and it was lumpy.
Well, listen, you had mentioned something to me before about the street being lower.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
I'm fascinated with the fact that Boone's Ferry is at the level it is now, because I can recall when it was 2 steps up to the tavern, because I sat there and on one railroad tie, however the dimensions are, and another one was the other step down to where the people parked their cars. And I sat there and waited for a doctor one time when my mother was ill. And the road is high now. I can understand the difference in the elevation where the railroad tracks cross, because they had to fill that in and take the thing down and all kinds of things. But it was quite a climb up over the railroad tracks to go get the milk every night. They've changed things here, and they did it without me looking.
I think maybe because of the flooding.
It might be, yeah.
Well, that was one reason we could stay at the Roberts place and they got no flooding, was simply because that railroad track used a levee type existence.
So what did you do for medical care?
That was non-existent. People didn't take their dogs or their kids to the doctor, so there was no need. Dr. Pennington, of course, was in Sherwood at that time, I think. And I remember a Dr. Bissett was a dentist in Tigard. But the only experience I ever had with medical was having to go into Portland to have my tonsils taken out.
Oh, into Portland.
And that was at the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital, I think. And it was from Dr. Kaiser, that was also related to the Thompsons. It was also related to us. And
oh, tell me, how are the Thompsons related to you?
J.R.C. Thompson was married, and he was the son of the pioneers. was married to Ben Cummins' sister.
I see.
And when she died, then he married the niece, a much younger woman, also a Cummins. So got two smacks there. And he was administrator of Ben Cummins' estate and took over the store after Ben Cummins died. And the two families he had are intermingled to where Laura Thompson, I forget where she fits in, but she was postmistress for so long here in another one of those longevity things. And
She was his sister, wasn't she?
she was, I think, a daughter in the younger family. First he married Clara Cummins, or scratch that, I don't really remember what her name was. I'd have to read my files. But Cummins, anyway. Ben Cummins' sister, must have been. Then married his niece, a daughter of one of the others. There's an article in the Hillsborough paper about congratulating him on his marriage to a young girl.
So where are the Shavers buried?
The Shavers are primarily at Crescent Grove in Tigard, and when the school or the sewage treatment plant or whatever it was that was placed on part of their donation land claim uprooted the family cemetery there was
Oh, wow.
3 little boys that were reinterred over at Crescent Grove.
Oh, really?
And 2 of them were my great-grandma's sons, Charles Shaver and Emma Ellis Cummins Shaver.
Well, Ben Cummins, didn't he lose a lot of children?
Let's see, they had 5 daughters. He and Corinna Weeks had 5 daughters. The youngest and last one was just a matter of months before she, and then from his second marriage to Alice Ross, they had a boy and a girl, both dying within months or maybe a year and a half of their birth. And I do believe, from a little medical research I tried to do with that branch of the family, it was spinal bifida, yeah, that took them.
Both of them? Oh, wow.
And then I have a cousin who is just a couple years younger than I, that was the son of Emma Ellis and Charles Shaver's only child besides my grandmother, just say 30 years ago, lost a child to spina bifida. So then I traced it back, and it seemed to be that, because my mother mentioned one time a hole in the neck or spinal problems.
Really? So it runs in the family.
So I think people doing genealogy should look into the medical histories too, along with their ancestors.
I know 23andMe, which is a DNA company that they can relate people to with diseases and say you might be prone to have this particular disease.
It can prevent a lot of problems.
Yeah. So the Shavers, where did they come from?
They were Pennsylvania originally, and before that, I think, as near as my cousin and I could determine, might have been from the Hushuns that came over to help during the Revolutionary War. In fact, I trace back that and several others that were, might say, revolutionists.
Yeah, well, now,
And, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. When the Schaefers came out here, Elizabeth Schaefer, she was a widow.
Yes.
Her husband died on the trail, or what?
No, he died back in Iowa, and she had grown children. She was an older woman, Elzinia Elizabeth Shaver, and several of the boys came out with her, and they all took donation land claims, which encompasses from Durham Road to the Tualatin River there. I think by the time the two boys and she took the donation land claim also, and then they purchased Saul Richardson's donation. Also, they would have owned darn close to 1,000 acres right in through there. Actually, that would encompass the elementary school, Durham Elementary School, the treatment plant, the high school, and on down to Cook Park.
Wow.
And then there is, or was, a little Century house on the road to Cook Park that was named after George Shaver and Bilyeu. They call it the Shaver Bilyeu or Bilyeu Shaver place. I don't know. I think it's off the National Registry
Well,
now.
Did Elizabeth get a land claim?
Did what?
Did Elizabeth get a land claim herself?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that a single woman could get a land claim.
Mm-hmm. That was the difference between that and the Homestead Act, for one thing. They could get, if they were married, husband and wife could both get something from the donation claim, but a widow could also get a share. What was it? 160, I think. 160 acres.
That's the only one I've ever heard of.
Because a man and wife was 320.
320,
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
And so there was, from the Tualatin River, from the bridge on up through there, Fano Creek and all that is part of the original Shaver outfit.
And you say the Shavers are buried where? The Shavers are buried where?
Oh, mostly at Crescent Grove,
Oh, Crescent Grove, that's correct. yeah.
over by Washington Square.
And there are some at Winona Cemetery.
Hmm?
There are some at Winona Cemetery, aren't there? There's a Shaver.
There's a Shaver there, but I could never have figured out what relation it
Oh,
would be.
really?
So I'm not sure. That it's not in my records.
So where's your mother buried?
She's buried there at Winona Cemetery
Oh, she
in
is?
Tualatin.
Oh,
Mhm. Right beside her father.
Oh,
And my great-grandma and her husband and my grandma.
that's
My
nice.
grandmother bought that 8 places plot in about 1927, and I think I have the deed for it, and she paid $35 for it,
For the 8?
for the 8 places.
Mhm.
Right.
They go for what, 850
so.
a place now. And I think I have the privilege of being the only one that can put artificial flowers on the graves because it's enclosed and not subject to cutting.
I noticed that just recently somebody knocked down the fence.
Oh,
So the cemetery it's quite a big
The perimeter
perimeter
fence.
fence, yeah, during the middle of the night, probably a drunk person.
Memorial Day, and that used to be such a big thing. All the people, of course, it was another walking situation. My grandma would take the wheelbarrow full of flowers
Oh, I've heard that, yeah.
and go up to the
Work on the
graves.
graves and put flowers on.
And this is when Asa Max had his stepdaughters already, and they would be up there, especially Margie Larson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Margie used to tell me that they would take a wheelbarrow
Mhm.
with the tools and things.
And the snowballs, the blossoms would be gone by the time they got there.
Sure. Of course. Yeah, the cemetery is a dear place. Yeah.
It used to be a gathering place.
Yes.
And I think before that, it was even more of a gathering place. The original shot of them of that first grave,
Right.
there was tons of people. Don't know where they came
I
from.
don't know either. There was a band. Yeah. So before the Winona Cemetery, I think people would would bury their people up at Robert Byrd in Stafford.
Mm.
And there were some, I think there were some people that had just little cemeteries on their farms.
Many, many, many times that's
Really?
the case. In fact, the Weeks, Weeks, family tie, which is, she married Ben Cummings, Corinna Weeks. Their plot was kind of hanging over the edge of the Gear land claim up at the junction of the Wilsonville Road and Ladd Hill Road.
Hmm.
And it's been obliterated now. Fortunately, people that did research have mentioned that it's there, and so I know it's there, but
I think even on the Edel place, I think the Toziers said that there was a little burial place. Well, I think actually oh gosh, what's that house that we tried to save?
The Hedges house?
The Hedges house. That where the old school was, the old log school along Herman Road, there was also a cemetery.
oh,
Because I believe the original Taylor's Ferry Road went from Taylor's Ferry up, on the river where the bridge is, River's Rest. I think it skirted the Beaver Dam
oh,
and met down there on Herman Road. And that's where the school was and our first cemetery. And Edel said that they remember a little cemetery down there.
uh-huh.
That's where the original Hedges were buried. So, and I know that the Jurgens, the first baby was buried on their farm, and God knows where it is now.
That's
The house is
it,
over
yeah.
there. They don't remember those. Can you think of anything else you need to tell us, Debbie?
I
Or-
probably could if I was home.
You're a storehouse of information. You really.
I, one of the originals.
Absolutely. You can't be copied.
And I can visualize, and it's pathetic the way I can visualize what it was and what it is now. This bedroom community just floors me. Over 22,000 people here.
Yes, more than that. And how many people were around when you were a kid here?
Oh, you could probably count downtown on both hands and get them all in. You counted the chickens and everything else. Norwood and outlying areas were just out beyond your recognition. And now you can't tell where one begins and one ends, and
Right.
stop the world, I want to get off.
Well, you are a storehouse of information, and thank you so much for coming today and talking to us. It's just precious.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I hoped it was informative, I don't know.
Oh, very.
Very much so. Thank you.